Hello again, everybody. Now, in our last lesson, we discussed the gerund in a lot of detail, and I hope that that wasn't too difficult for you. But now we're going to practice something that I hinted at a little bit in the last lesson, and something that can be very confusing. And that is, when do you use the gerund, and when do you use the infinitive? And if there's a difference, what is it? So let's begin by looking at some cases of usage of the infinitive and reviewing what the infinitive even does. One way that we can use the infinitive is to express purpose. For example, I'm calling to invite you to my birthday party. Here, to invite tells you about the purpose of calling. Or we also use the infinitive after certain adjectives. For example, it's difficult to recognize it. Likewise, we also use the infinitive after certain verbs. For example, appear, decide, plan, hope, promise, etc. Like in the sentence, they decided to move to Japan. Here, the infinitive tells me what they decided. We also use the infinitive after phrases which talk about preference. I would like, love, prefer, to do something, like in the sentence, I would like to visit this art gallery. We also use to with to, T-O-O, and enough constructions, like in the phrase, I'm too tired to argue with you, as well as after the phrases be, followed by the first, second, next, last, or what we call ordinal phrases, phrases which talk about the order of things, first, second, like in the phrase, John is the best person to rely on. Now, we can also use this in objective and subjective constructions. Now, this may sound complicated, but I promise you've seen it before. It shows up in the phrases, we want you to study this topic properly, and he was thought to be very honest. And one more usage of to is in introductory statements, like to begin with, to sum up, to conclude with, to be honest, to be fair. Any of these introductory statements we will use with to. And there are more, but we use these like in the example. To be honest, I forgot to warn them. This is just a set of expressions in English, and you'll just need to memorize them. Now, there are also some times when we use the infinitive without the word to. These are called the bare infinitives, and let's look at some examples of when we use this. The first time we use this is after modal verbs, like in the phrase, you must work hard to prepare for the exam. Here, work, the normal infinitive would be to work, but in the phrase you must work, we don't say to, and you could never, ever say you must to. Forget that phrase even exists. Another time we use the bare infinitive is after auxiliary verbs. For example, I do not understand you, as well as after the verbs let, make, feel, hear, or see. Like in the examples, he made me tell lies. I let you go. I've never seen you look so beautiful. Also, after the expressions had better, would rather, and would sooner, like in the phrases, I'd rather do it tomorrow. You had better go to bed and rest, and you would sooner finish the play than read the whole book. Now, we should also point out that the infinitive also has multiple forms, which you should see on your screen right now. It has simple, continuous, perfect, and perfect continuous tenses, as well as, in the simple and perfect tenses, having active and passive voices. And if you remember, there is no passive voice in continuous tenses, either perfect continuous or simple continuous. The one that I want to spend a little bit more time discussing is the perfect infinitive. And the perfect infinitive expresses the action happening before the action expressed in the predicate. For example, I'm glad to have met you at the party. Here, I'm happy now about something that happened in the past. I am currently happy because I met you at the party. Now let's move on to comparing the gerund versus the infinitive and knowing the exact differences between them. First, with the verbs and word groups to be afraid, to hate, to like, and to dislike, the infinitive is mostly used to refer to a special occasion, while the gerund expresses general statements. For example, I don't like interrupting people, or I wouldn't like to interrupt him, he seems very busy. Also, in the phrases, don't be afraid to tell the truth, and he was afraid of having made a mistake. Here, don't be afraid to tell the truth talks about specific occurrences where you may need to tell the truth. And he was afraid of having made a mistake speaks more generally. Now, if we move on to talking about the verb to remember, as well as its antonym, to forget, to remember with the gerund refers to the past, or speaking about an event generally, and to remember with the infinitive refers to the future or about the task itself, even if it's in the past. Like in the examples, I remember seeing the book in the bookstore. Here, I remember seeing it. I remember the event in total. However, if I say remember to buy the book, here I'm speaking about remembering a task. Remember to buy the book. Now again, to forget with the gerund or to regret with the gerund are used to talk about things that people did in the past. However, forget and regret when used with the infinitive talks about things that people are supposed to do or were supposed to do. For example, if I say, don't forget to lock the door, here, I'm giving you a task, much like remember to buy the book. But if I say, I'll never forget meeting you in Paris, here I'm talking about something I did. I met you in Paris in the past. Another example, we regret to inform you that your offer is not acceptable to us. Here, again, I'm performing a task. I regret to inform you. And this task now is taking place in the present. However, if I say, I regret not having done it earlier, here, when used with the gerund, I am expressing a regret about a past action or inaction. Now, it isn't always just the meaning that changes between the gerund and the infinitive phrases. Sometimes the syntactical functions themselves change. And let's look at how this works with the verb to stop. If I use stop with the gerund forms part of a compound predicate, like in the sentence, they stopped talking when she came in. However, if I use the infinitive, I'm expressing purpose, or grammatically, I'm modifying my verb to an adverb which expresses purpose. They stopped to exchange words with each other. Here, I'm telling you about why they stopped, not what they stopped. Another example which experiences significant changes are the verb to go on, or the phrasal verb to go on. To go on with a gerund expresses the continuation of an activity. For example, go on talking, or continue talking. To go on with the infinitive, however, expresses a change to a new activity. For example, she then went on to describe another picture. Here, they're performing very different roles in the sentence. In the first, the gerund, we're continuing, and in the second, we are changing. It's the opposite meaning. We're changing to a new activity. Also, to try. To try with a gerund talks about an experiment, or if you're seeing if something works. For example, she tried eating less junk food, but it had no effect. However, to try with the infinitive speaks about something which is difficult to do, but you're still trying to do it. For example, try to explain it to him without ruffle or excitement. Here, I'm telling you about the task. And there are also some times when you can choose whether or not you want to use the infinitive or the gerund, and it really doesn't matter. Some of the verbs that this is true for are begin, start, continue, allow, permit, recommend, and there are others. So let's look at how this works in some examples. In the first, we continued discussing the project, or we continued to discuss the project. Here, I've said basically the same thing. Actually, I've said exactly the same thing, and you can choose which structure you want to use. However, if I say something like, don't allow him to smoke, and we do not allow smoking, there is a difference. If there is no object after the verb, the gerund is usually preferable, whereas the infinitive is used after an object in many cases. Don't allow him to smoke. Him is the object, so we use an infinitive phrase instead of the gerund. We also commonly use the infinitive after some adjectives, especially when we're talking about feelings or emotions. Like in the phrase, I'm happy to do that, or I'm pleased to meet you, or even, I'm sorry to disturb you, and I'm surprised to hear it. A few other phrases, I'm glad, I'm anxious to, I'm shocked, all of these are used with infinitive phrases. However, some other adjectives can be followed by prepositions and gerunds. Like in the examples, I'm fed up with doing something, or I'm fond of going there, as well as phrases like I'm annoyed at, I'm tired of, or I'm good and bad at. These phrases we all use with gerunds after the preposition. Now, that's all for today. Be sure to pay special attention to instances where the meaning of a sentence or of a verb phrase changes depending on if you use the gerund or the infinitive. For example, stop, regret, forget, remember, try, go on, and there are more. In addition, remember to omit to in verb phrases using the verbs let, make, feel, see, or hear, as well as the expressions had better, would rather, and would sooner. Now be sure to review this lesson a couple times because this is one of the few cases in English where the meaning of your sentence or of your phrase can dramatically change if you make a mistake here. And it's one of the few times where you could be really, really misunderstood. So be sure to review all of the materials provided and review this lesson at least 1 or 2 more times. Good luck studying, and I'll see you in the next